Welcome to Powering the Future Within, the podcast where we explore the breakthroughs shaping the future of MedTech. I'm Omari, CEO of Resonant Link Medical. Each episode, we speak with a leader who is driving the next wave of medical innovation, advancing technologies that are smarter, less invasive, and more connected than ever before. This is where the future of health takes shape. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Jennifer Ernst. Jennifer is a builder who has lived her professional career at the edge of what's possible. She has spent a significant portion of her career operating at the intersection of neurotechnology, immunology, and consumer-facing bioelectronic medicine. As co-founder and CEO of Tivic Health, she led the development of neuromodulation therapies designed to treat inflammation and chronic conditions without surgery. She's taken ideas from whiteboard to market, led companies through pivotal shifts in direction, and built in that uncomfortable but exciting space where the science is ahead of demand and the market has to be created, not just captured. Jennifer, welcome to Powering the Future Within.
Thank you. Appreciate the introduction.
Absolutely. So excited to have you on as a guest today. And so you began a good portion of your career at Xerox PARC, which is almost mythological in terms of its innovation and invention. How did that experience shape your career?
Well, it starts with people have to know about Xerox PARC that it's actually an incredibly interdisciplinary organization. So covers everything from physical sciences, computational sciences, social sciences, and even crossed into energy and health related at one point. So first of all, it gave me this extraordinarily unusual exposure to broad technology, to a broad base of science. Fundamentally, a theme that has run through my entire career is that translation of science into something that matters,
Right.
taking it through that impact journey. So at Park, I started in the communications organization, and then I moved into, I was the first business development director when Xerox decided to spin Park out and make a business out of a research center. So that alone was a very educating, illuminating. I was out talking to companies, trying to match our science with what they might need, and building relationships at very senior levels of companies to try to get them to have Park do work for them on their behalf, and learning really the subtle differences between how people saw the concept of research science and eventually pivoting the way we talked about it as to enabling breakthroughs. So always had to have got to be kind of a bit ahead of the curve. I was seeing things on the World Wide Web, have a published paper about commerce on the World Wide Web that predates Amazon. I probably shouldn't say that, but it gives you kind of scale or scope.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, so I guess you asked the question, how did it shape? It gave me this broad depth, but it also made me very comfortable in that period of uncertainty when you don't really know exactly where the science is going to take you. Just as an example, we had a flow discovery around fluid dynamics about how to make particles move in the fluid in ways that hadn't previously been seen. And so the first thing was there were new laws of fluid dynamics to be discovered. The second part was, is this more important for blood separation, for water treatment processing? I mean, we had to really say, okay, we've discovered a novel way to manage fluids. Now, what is it good for? How could it be used? So that it's fundamentally different than when you start with what the problem set is and you want to say, and I need to go find the best solution for the problem. So I've gone both directions.
right. Yeah, no, it's very interesting to think about a research center from a business perspective. I can imagine that you were kind of going through a matching game where we have a technology, and we're looking for the application. How difficult was it to find a good match for tech development that maybe had not quite found an application yet?
In most of the cases, the researchers had already been thinking about why they were doing their work and what was going to motivate them. Um, but then it came down more to the precise matching. Just as an example, we had a technology that it was essentially a tampon for delivery of of IVD drugs. And that was what was the passion of the researcher. Where it turned out to be particularly valuable was it was in animal husbandry, where they actually want large doses of the drug administered in order to make the animals more fertile and produce um, more eggs and embryos. So the application there, the application match between them, it was more about finding that along those kind of spectrum of changes. But
Right.
it was, I mean, it's an amazing environment of um, and a culture that I truly respect that is built to be collaborative. Everybody has their space. If you're there, if you got through the door, everybody expects you're good. You have a right to be there. So it was incredible culture basically my formative years.
And I can imagine when you do find that match between technology and application and you see it take off, that has to be very rewarding.
It's very rewarding. It's part of It's great to do it when you're matching to a larger company and you can see there's an innovation taking hold. Sometimes companies came to Park just to expose their research teams to have the experience of um, working in that different kind of innovation-oriented environment, just basically to get the culture transfer. So we had programs like that, and yes, it's incredibly rewarding, but from the vantage point I was at, which was strategic licensing, bringing large customers to Park, I didn't have the chance to really to see it on the other side. When it gets transferred actually into or starting the company around it, which is why, that takes me into the next part of the career journey.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Coming from the technology development to the matching the application, then taking it all the way through. And you've described the hardest part of deep tech commercialization as building the business before the market actually exists. What does it actually feel like to build something the world doesn't know it needs yet?
That's an interesting question. I'm gonna draw on sort of where I went after Park, because I went through for Park, as I said, I couldn't take it all the way. So I joined one of my client companies. Joined one of the companies that was working with Park and took the science out. I think the thing that was in making that transition, the thing that, was most surprising, you always knew that there was work that had to be done on the other side, but the difference between doing something in a lab and doing something in production at scale, reproducibly with a high quality system, um, it was such a different vantage point to be looking at it from. So I was working with printed electronics. Uh, we were making basically smart labels. This was during the time when everybody was talking about Internet of Things. So we were making embedded intelligence that could be embedded basically in a label and applied. We had a series, the labels for toys and games, basically a memory only series. We had a smart sensor we were working on that included printed batteries, displays, logic, and the memory technology. And that was when you really saw, you have to wrestle through the questions of how do these things integrate. There'd been this grand vision in the field of printed electronics that everything would be printed on, it would be printed like you would print a four-color brochure was the idea. Well, we'll print the logic, they'll all be in multiple passes, and we'll do it all at the same time. Turns out it's not very economically efficient to do it all at the same time. So then you get into, well, should we be taking these things and cutting them up? Um, and then material stability. I remember talking to one of our partners. They had we were talking about getting barrels of a solution in barrels of ink in this electronic ink, um, in order to do some test runs, and learning that they had really never produced anything larger than a beaker. So the chemical scale up and the chemistry, so much that had to be done, bringing partners for the materials, being able to process development inside. and then ended up acquiring a company that had a bit more mature technology, but still, was still really at the cutting edge, doing flexible doing a flexible backplane, but not necessarily roll-to-roll printing, but doing sheet printing. So all ended up in about 4 product lines. We had a crazy launch with Diageo, that actually, that got covered in about 100 publications worldwide, and Diageo is be the company behind Johnny Walker Blue and probably about a third of the spirits industry.
So in that case, you really did go from beakers to barrels.
Literally, literally. I actually had one day I remember, hearing somebody call from the dock, call from the back, of the warehouse. "I got a pallet of Johnny Walker Blue. What do you want me to do with it?"
Let's talk about Tivic. What's the origin story behind Tivic? You've had all this great experience at Xerox PARC, but it sounds like you're really motivated to be able to take things all the way through to the next level. And I understand that one of our previous guests, Karen Drexler, actually helped to be a bit of an inspiration to you to start the company.
Right, it was she was. So Tivic started with an invention, um, and I would encourage anybody if there's anything anyone's gonna take away from this interview, if you're thinking about the idea of starting a company or you're noodling with ideas, Tivic came out of a conversation with my former landlord, literally. And it started a ball rolling that got me connected to someone who got me connected to someone who eventually ended up talking to the inventor of this, what at the time looked like a rectal thermometer for a cow. But he had this device that could be used on the outside of the sinus passages. You drag the device along, and it emits a pulsed electrical signal. As you move it around, you're guided. His wife had been encouraging him to find a way to commercialize it because he kinda made it for her, but, um, she saw this. He was a 30-year biomedical engineer, so we kinda hit it off, and we spent some time getting to know each other and then decided, I know how to build companies, I've been trained in how to do that, you know how to build devices. It's kind of irresponsible of us not to give it a shot. So we started, and it was 2 people, and then one of my people from thin film joined, and then another person joined, and another person joined, and gradually we built up, launched the first ever home use neuromodulation product for the treatment of sinus pain, pressure, and congestion through FDA, got it through the CE mark, actually FDA twice, sold about 50,000 units, and, I mean, it was very cool. I mean, it was a very exciting time with the company to be building. The genesis of it was an invention in someone's garage, literally.
Wow, that's fascinating. And at what point in the conversations did you feel as though, okay, this is someone that I really want to be able to launch a company with? A lot of times you speak to co-founders and they talk about making that decision as so critical because you're establishing a long-term relationship, almost like a marriage of sorts. When did you know, okay, this is we think we've got a match here that's going to allow us to be able to really create this company and drive it forward?
Um, it took about 6 months of getting to know each other, having conversations. I was still deciding what I wanted to do. I knew at Thin Film I had kind of peaked. I was a chief strategy officer. The CEO wasn't going anywhere. So, um, I had started looking around and looking for something to sink my teeth into, and, with my background, to be quite honest, with my background from Park, I'd been talking to SRI, I talked to Park, had some conversations with NASA's research organization, and for some reason, this electrostimulation concept, it just got under my skin. I was so fascinated by the results we were seeing with this demo version and not knowing the science of why, not knowing why it worked. So, it really was as I was researching the field of bioelectronics and looking at what was known and understood about the human electrical system. I mean, we are an electrochemical mechanical system. and how little is how little was understood and how much was happening at the research frontier of bioelectronics, um, that got me more and more interested in the field. So eventually, it was, like I said, about 6 months having lunches together, having coffees together, talking about what would the FDA pathway be. Um, and then his wife actually got the first checks for us. You know, said if you're willing to do it, I can help get some of the first capital in. So the first check was $5,000 to build a new version of the prototype that didn't look quite so scary, to build the first version of it, and then 30,000 and then 300,000, and eventually I raised 13 million in the private market.
Wow. Wow. And what did you learn about the patient population along the way as you took this journey?
Um, there were some interesting learnings. I think when I started this, we were saying, okay, these because when I showed the concept to people, they were over the moon. I mean, you couldn't go into a room where somebody doesn't have sinus issues. It's 20 to 25% of the population. So every time I pitched, I've got people who are sitting there saying, "When can I buy it?" Um, so what I learned about the patient population itself would talk about sinus pain. They talk about this pain and this pressure and this buildup. And I needed some ENT advisors. So I started reaching out to ENTs, getting some people involved. We did find one who was particularly really like loved entrepreneurship and wanted to be active with us. But the surprising thing was they don't know what causes the pain. Now, I believe it's at this point, I believe it's an inflammation someplace in the tissue, but it may not be inflammation that they can observe from inside the nose when they're actually going in. So it's one of the most frustrating symptoms for them to treat because the people come back CT negative. They don't see any, they don't see any inflammation, and the drugs don't really do anything for it. So yeah, it was an interesting journey to discover about the patient population, how prevalent it was, how little understood it was, and interestingly, how undertreated it was.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's been kinda considered as a nuisance condition, but for someone who's really suffering from sinus issues is really problematic, and to be able to provide relief to that patient population must be really rewarding, and when you look at the clinical evidence you were able to generate, it's quite compelling between reduction in inflammation and particularly reduction in pain.
Right, reduction in pain, reduction in congestion. We did our study at Stanford Sinus Center with the president of the American Rhinologic Society, so I was proud of being able to get that caliber of research behind it. But when you talk about the effect of that sinus pressure, when we get the allergy seasons, when we get the headaches, a dental hygienist told me she has to take several weeks a year off because she can't lean forward. During the periods when she's getting really bad flare-ups, she literally can't work. I talked to somebody who had to leave a job in business development because she couldn't get on airplanes. There was another gentleman who had to make a similar career change. He could not lean forward or work when he had. So it's, again, this so these it's a condition that isn't glamorous. I mean, I know more about snot now than I ever wanted to. Um, but it's not a glamorous condition, but it's a very abundant one.
Right. And it strikes me that when you were going out for investment and support, Tivic was ahead of the curve in some respects, being a bioelectronic at home use device, kind of consumer focused device versus some of the investors who are more either on either side of the fence, traditionally medtech investors that are sort of used to
Right.
PMA paths, long approvals and reimbursement on the other sides, or people who are more focused on truly consumer devices. What was the reception that you found and what you learned in trying to raise capital?
Yeah, at that time, um, consumer devices were definitely not in favor. Um, I I actually had thought, okay, I've got two shots on goal: consumer type investors and medtech investors. No. What it actually did is put us right down a chasm between the 2. It wasn't a big branded play, which is what the consumer investors would be looking for. They're looking for the next brand of a lot that you want multiple product lines under. And it wasn't a traditional med tech play. The price point on it, we were gonna be in that $169 to $249 price point range, and, investors are thinking about thousands of dollar devices with reimbursement pathways behind them. Um, Also, as I'd read up on all of the neurotech stuff, this has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. But at the time I was starting Tivic, peripheral nerve stimulation was considered kind of woo-woo. It was kinda like, yeah, not no, that's all the real science is being done in the brain. And now we have the vagus nerve stimulators that have been approved. Um, the implanted ones, at Tivic, I started a program to do that non-invasively. We had some very good results coming out of that. Um, and then there's this managing the business part of it. So with the I hear a lot of the health companies now saying, "Well, we're gonna start with something consumer, and then we'll move it into a medical application." And the second learning was how hard it is to innovate once you've gotten your FDA clearance. Like, I came out of a tech industry where you get minimum viable product, and then you can iterate on it, and, we really didn't have that opportunity because everything became a question, well, does this have to go through another clinical trial? If we make a change, do we have to go to another trial in order to prove it out again that this small change we wanna make in the amplitude of the current changes, um, would would have a would it affect the efficacy? And, so that was actually probably as tech person coming into the health tech field, more that was more daunting than I had expected. So
Right.
I would probably have put more features and functionality in the first product if I were to do it again.
Yeah, there's a certain point where you kind of become almost locked in. And yes, you can make some iterations and changes, but then oftentimes that triggers having to go back through another clinical evaluation, which is a big challenge.
Right? It was just not where you wanna be spending your money when you are commercially launched and you're trying to get your revenue levels up.
Yeah. And but you persisted. You managed to take the company public on the Nasdaq. What was that experience like? Being able to take the company public?
Well, you may remember that, uh, I Tivic, I feel like I had some bad timing moments. People have asked me, what would you do differently? And I have to say, well, one thing is you probably shouldn't, don't found the company so that you're doing your A round right before a global pandemic. Um, so I literally was going out for my A round to try to get the serious investment to scale up the marketing, in January of 2020. So, we were able to get enough capital to get through 2020. At the time, I had a decent amount of inventory, so we started we called it our plastics to cash. We had a fair amount of inventory, plastics to cash, just get these products moving and get the sales going as quickly as we can to really turn that over. But there was really no source of capital that after a year of trying to find that magic round that we needed for scaling, because Zenfilm, the company I'd done before, was a micro cap public company, we decided to take the chance and go public. The expectation at the time was by when going public, we would also have treasury stock that we could use for acquisition and begin to build out the company, inorganically as well. So the second part of the advice would be don't go public right before your sector crashes. So we went public in November 21, and in December 21, the biotech crash happened. So the mismatch between the private valuations and the public valuations made it very difficult for us to do any acquisitions in that window, um, just because of the valuation difference between the markets. So I ended up doing the vagus nerve stimulation program. We started that in 2020 with very experimental. 2021, we were getting good results on it and took that to the Feinstein Institute for Bioelectronic Medicine. I think we started with them in 22, 23, and then we're doing trials on a non-invasive vagus nerve stimulation that showed marked changes in heart rate variability and in brain activity. So we were seeing significant changes in objective, measurable results. So
That's really, really impressive that you managed to continue to pivot and find your way. And then you made the call to pivot the direction of the entire company. What did that decision process look like?
So while we were working on the vagus nerve stimulation, I was continuing to look at sourcing opportunities that would complement it. At that point, we were positioned as an immunotherapeutics company. So Tivic was becoming a diversified immunotherapeutics. We had one commercial product, one platform for the VNS that was beginning. But we also saw, the VNS development timeline that's going to be 2, 3, 4 years probably. So I was continuing to look and source. I mean, I looked at tons of companies. We can have we can have all sorts of conversations about what companies shouldn't do if they want to be acquired, because the number of errors made on the cap tables was just horrifying. Um, so there were a number of reasons. Um, this one came along as a licensing agreement instead of an acquisition, and it was a drug compound that modulated the immune system, activates the immune system in a different way than what um, our devices could. Already it had $190 million invested in it, and we were able to get it for a 1.2 million in equity, 300,000 in cash. I mean, that kind of value difference. There was a long history. There was a lot of hair on the deal that had to be cleaned up, but it was an opportunity for us to bring a heavy duty opportunity. I mean, $190 million spent defense applications. It was spent for acute radiation syndrome and a drug named Intelamod. And we were able to just immediately jump in by bringing some of their team members over, able to immediately jump in and build out relationships with BARDA. The company recently announced the Department of Defense has been talking to them. There's, the Ukraine that is now public, that the Ukraine is requesting information for the drug compound. And it's an opportunity actually to replace an entire category of GCSF drugs. So there's a $9 billion sector that is extremely well established in oncology. The drug works upstream of the GCSF drugs and provides more benefits, provides a wider window of benefits. Um, so at some point, we were saying, okay, we're raising the capital, we're a diversified immunotherapeutics company, we have multiple platforms to invest in. But the difference in the valuation of a drug company versus a device company is
Yeah,
significant.
yeah.
So in the interest of shareholders, we closed up the bioelectronic portions, focused the energy and effort into in the development of Ontolamod, the advancement of Ontolamod, and that included acquiring our manufacturing partner, acquiring a small CDMO out in San Antonio that is now serving as a vertically integrated development and manufacturing operation.
Yeah, I can imagine that it became important to have full control of the supply chain if part of the value proposition is for defense. So for acute
Exactly.
radiation syndrome, there's applications in oncology, there's applications in defense. And essentially what your therapeutic has the potential to do is assist or boost the immune system. Is that right?
And that's correct. It activates the NF-kappa B pathway. It activates a pathway that's upstream and protects the cells from radiation damage. So it protects the GI tract, has been shown to protect the GI tract and the white blood cells, the neutrophils. Actually, the cells that make the cells are protected, which is what usually gets destroyed in both radiation and chemotherapy. And it's when you have large doses of radiation, you almost certainly are going to have a destruction of your white blood cells and the epithelials, the cells that make the epithelial linings for our gastrointestinal system.
That is quite the pivot. Quite the pivot.
It it was a 2025 was an exhausting year. I will say that. So I acquired two distressed assets. It was early in the year. licensed in the technology, built up the biologics team, then towards the end of the year, completed the acquisition of the CDMO that we had been working with. Uh, and at that point, it was full scale biologics. I had brought in somebody who had 17 drugs under his belt. It was one of those times it seems the right time.
Right, right. And the company is now set up for a great future. So a lot of effort, a lot of consideration. I can imagine some pretty intense discussions, but in the end, well worth the effort.
Right. I do remember just as we were considering the CDMO acquisition, I remember putting up the picture of the burning boats. This is a moment where you're burning the boats. This is a no going back from this decision. Um, and yeah, so we worked it through thoroughly, but it really was a case where it made sense because of the defense application and because moving, going if we'd had to move manufacturing anyplace else, if they went insolvent or there were problem there, if we had to move manufacturing anyplace else, it was gonna delay us another 18 months. It would have extended the timeline dramatically. So with lead customers like the US government talking with you actively about stockpiling a drug, about national stockpiling, that you don't wanna be kicking that can 2 years down the road.
No, no, you can't. Yeah. I've always liked that metaphor of burning boats, and I often feel as though it can really galvanize an organization to say, "Hey, here's the clear direction. We're going forward at full speed, and this is it." Was that your
Right.
experience? Did it help galvanize and kind of help cultivate a culture that clearly knew what the vision and direction was?
Yes, I mean, I think the initial in licensing, rebuilding the team, and then the changes with our chief scientific officer, moving out of the bioelectronic area. The hardest part was probably closing down the clear up business because it simply was not kicking off the kind of cash that warranted management attention. So we closed that part up, and yeah, it was a exciting journey to be a part of.
Yeah, but and at the same time, probably some feelings of, some emotional feelings around clear up because it's very effective treatment. As mentioned, the clinical data had been so strong, but it given you so much also insight into inflammation and the impacts of inflammation. So in some ways, very much a nice setup to where you pivoted to, but there's also probably some emotional component to having a technology that's so promising and had such an impact.
Yeah. The crazy thing was when we went IPO. Yeah, we went IPO as a platform company, and there's this thing called a tombstone. You always get a little plaque, a little something for the IPO from your bankers. We got ours, and it was a clear up about this big. I had taken a clear up form and made it. So I laughed when I opened it.
So you've been at this intersection of neurotech, immunology, AI. These three fields are individually can go very, very deep. What are you seeing and what do you think about how these areas are starting to converge?
Well, for me, the thing about devices, one of the things I thought about devices is devices can do things that pills can't do. And so when we talk about device, I think when I first started with bioelectronics, I was hearing a lot of more compare and contrast. Is it better than a drug, or with with the neural pathways, much like I just described with entolimod, with the neural pathways, they're very much multi-pathway. You're not trying to get in and get at something to bind to one particular receptor. You're trying to influence the signals that are going across the system. And so just from a therapeutic point of view, there's a different type of benefit I think we can be achieving with these, with the electro, whether it's ultrasound, TMS, with any of these sort of EMF type field approaches with the stimulation of the nervous system. The other part, though, is devices can communicate. And that's where I think a lot of the power is going to come in. The more measurements that are available. And now we think about pairing all of that with your wearables, your Oura ring, your health. That's where I think things are going to start to are getting. incredibly interesting. And then I'm also myself still really interested in the peripheral nerve stimulation area, as I am aware of some work that I think is formed the foundation for our VNS program at Tivic. It informed it, but there is so much opportunity still in how do the systems at the edge work, and that's where my background with Park actually creates this interesting lens on the world, is because Park was the home of distributed computing. It was not very efficient to have everything go to the mainframe computer and then come back. So computing at the edge, having your actual computation built into the device that's out here instead of the central network, was part of what Park innovated. And I think about our body's system. When I started Tivic, there was a very strong bias at that time that everything was managed by the central nervous system. Everything is managed. Everything has to go to the brain. Well, I mean, all the signals go to the brain, but there's a whole lot happening at the edge of the network, in the cells, in the macrophages, in what's actually happening, um, in how the body's responding, how the organs are triggered. I think we're barely, barely at the tip of the iceberg right now in terms of what's going to be learned and what can be learned. Um, I'll just give one other thing to think about. The Human Genome Project, decoding the human genome, right? That was 13 years, I think, to do. If we consider the horsepower of computation that's available today, that program could have been done in minutes.
That's an incredible comparison, and I think really brings things into perspective in terms of how far we've come. Wow.
Yeah. So the
And
raw computational horsepower that is available to us, and will continue to, the leaps forward in quantum computing that are going to enable even denser and denser type information or processing. That's the stuff that's going to unlock. I think that's where we really are headed, is unlocking the electrical system and beginning to understand. I would love in my lifetime to see the electrical signals of the body as well characterized as the molecular biology is.
yeah,
Wouldn't
I
that be
think right
cool?
now we're still moving through a little bit of trial and error, and we're seeing sometimes results that we don't fully understand and appreciate. So to be able to sort of decode the electrical system the way we have the genome would be incredibly powerful.
Right. It's not only about, I mean, the stuff that's happening in the brain and the differences between what's a thought and what's an impulse and what actually happens there, but then how the signals go through the body and are managed, can be managed either from an external or stimulation parameter or an implant. I think it's an exciting field to be looking at.
Absolutely. So upon reflection, you've raised millions of dollars in capital. You've navigated FDA clearance. You've gone from sort of napkin to all the way to products. You've built supply chains. You've taken a company public. Were any of those particularly difficult in comparison to the others? Anything surprising in managing any of these?
Well, there's always surprises along the way. You talked about building supply chain, having the entire world shut down, having the Suez Canal shut down, and having the boats 50 miles offshore. Yeah, there's always surprises. They're always a bit challenging. I had to say, I think surviving as a public company as on in the micro cap was more challenging. It was probably the most challenging part of it, was keeping the company itself afloat as we made adjustments to the business model. Usually you don't go public until you've got great product market fit. You're at least 40 million in revenue. We were at about a million in revenue and a negative 16% gross margin. So having to be very transparent with the open market about what we were doing to improve the gross margins, eventually got it to 75% in the managing the public vehicle, because there were a lot of headwinds. There are a lot of headwinds, and I wouldn't suggest doing that for anyone. I would not ever suggest that it was a good idea to go public, but it was the only option available for us to keep the company moving forward. And it did give us tools then, the tools to build the company in a different way that we would not have had available to us if I yeah, it would have been a choice of shut the company down, if we hadn't done it.
So it was the path forward, but I can imagine it to be quite challenging to have to go through that evolution while being under the public lens. So
Right.
I would think that would be very challenging. The other one that I've heard, which I'm curious on your perspective on, is that it can be, challenging but easier to run a company for the short term, challenging but easier to run a company for the long term, but it's incredibly difficult to do both at the same time. Is that a concept that resonates with you?
That is a concept that resonates, yes, it is. Um, it's what a CEO has to do, but when you're in hardcore startup mode, you're basically running it short term. I do have a bias to play the long game, so the reason we were able to exercise the option of going public was because I had built relationships with investment bankers. I had I had walked Wall Street. I had made the connections that would give us that option. I didn't expect to be doing it quite so early in the company, but it gave us, it gave us an option that we wouldn't have had if I hadn't played a long game. And I think for most startups, the, the framework that somebody told me is if you're not successful with your first product, it really doesn't matter else you plan to do. The focus has to be on that near term execution with the aspiration to be something bigger and to grow it bigger.
Yeah, for sure. The other challenge you've managed really, really well is working alongside brilliant scientists who might have great concepts, but maybe not know the practicalities of how to bring those to market or to find application or product market fit. What is something or some things that you've learned about engaging some of the great scientific minds and helping to guide their insights towards practical application?
Well, scientists come in different forms, and I've worked with some that are what we call T-shaped people. They know a little bit about all this, and they know it's out there, and then they are very, very deep in one area. Um, the point is to fill out the rest of it. I mean, we have to have, as a company, we're filling out the whole, the rest of it. I've always been someone who takes a lot of interest in the science, but it's for the purpose of trying to understand it and bring it out of the academic mindset. Um, I think science my move from Park to being the person in Park's customer in thin film taught me, when you're in research, you're looking at this lens and saying, the distance between here and commercial is about that long. When you're looking at it on the other side, the distance is a lot longer. Um, it's a much bigger chasm. Um, so understanding that just, having the core science is only a very small part of the equation that has to be built, in order to build the whole company. Now, I've seen some things in the research lab where, you're using a you're using a device that couldn't possibly be brought into a hospital, for example. There's a stimulation device and it's got all the wires hooked off of it. Going from that to something, a nurse is going to be able to roll around in the hospital, or it's going to fit the capital market structure of the healthcare system. There's just so many other pieces of it. Most scientists are fascinated by that. I think I introduced one scientist to the extreme quantification of marketing. That the marketing is actually a discipline. It is a scientific discipline to a certain extent. It is a one you can model. It's one you you want to put a lot of rigor and data behind in your marketing as much as you do in your science. And I think sometimes that part of the equation surprises scientists, but by and large, the people I've worked with have been crazy smart. And it's probably the most fun part of my journey is being able to you know, keep up with the intellect of those kind of people.
Yeah, definitely helps to have all the experiences that you have. And clearly, you're very adept at engaging at the scientific level. So I can imagine it makes for a great, great partnership.
I can fake it to a certain extent when I represent them outside. I still have to drag them along though for for some of the meetings.
And so now, after 10 years of building Tivic, you're now standing at the beginning of your next chapter. You've mentioned a little bit, but I'm curious to explore a bit more what you're seeing happening in the market that's really exciting for you, and what do you envision for yourself next?
Well, I haven't made a firm decision what I'm going to do next. I mean, I think I've still got probably one more in me in terms of if I wanted to do another company. I'm gonna be taking my time and doing the same kind of search I did when I started Tivic is, looking at some things, understanding what the state of the science is. Um, that's something for anybody who embarks on the journey. It's once your head's down in the company, holy crap, the world can change around you. In that, the difference in 10 years in neurotech is amazing. Um, so I am, I'm still very keenly interested in the minimally invasive or non-invasive approaches. Those are areas I'm, considering where we might be able to leverage some of the insights um, that have been developed over the last 10 years. I mean, if you think about this and positioning this, um, the connection between the immune system and and the central nervous system was only discovered in the early 2000s. So we're talking less than 25 years ago, right? I mean, we're talking less than 25 years of even applying these technologies. And now the first ones like Setpoint Medical have been approved. Um, but there's so much undiscovered territory in terms of how we can leverage the electrical system of the body. And so that's probably my first sort of focus and passion. Um, but there's another part of me that would also just love to be backing love to get into the investing side and be backing the next generation of innovators.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so much opportunity, so much undiscovered, and also so much being explored. And with the set of experiences, whether you put that behind another innovation that's coming to market, or if you do it behind investing in the field, you're going to have incredible impact. And we're all very excited to see what you do decide to do next.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us on Powering the Future Within. If this conversation inspired you, follow the show and share it with your MedTech community. I'm Omari Bachnight. Stay inspired and keep innovating.